and co-founder of the New Zionist Congress, which focuses on fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses. And he is also the new media director for the Jewish Journal. In an article from Tablet magazine in 2020, Blake wrote, quote, "All of polite society seems to be in agreement that victim blaming is bad, except for when the victims are Jewish students. Why is that?" To say the least, it means quite a lot to see somebody who is asking these questions while also identifying as a progressive, still championing Zionism, even while progressive movements progressively become more and more exclusionary towards Zionists, which obviously is a demographic that includes the overwhelming majority of American Jews. I'm sure that we've all spent a lot of time thinking about this subject, and I am very excited and glad to hear Blake's thoughts on that topic, and particularly how they may have evolved since that article was published in 2020. And yeah, let Blake take it away.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. So first, let me start off by saying that it's truly wonderful to be here. I was really hoping that I would be able to see you in person, to meet with you in person, but unfortunately, life got in the way in really annoying and frustrating ways, as it tends to do sometimes. Things rarely go according to plan, but it's really great that this avenue worked out. So thank you, first of all. Second of all, that introduction kind of touched on how I got involved in this work. And I should first pull back and describe really what this work is. So I just turned 22, and I graduated from George Washington University a couple years ago. I was a pandemic graduate, so I've been living in New York for the past 2 or 3 years, and I'm moving to Israel in a couple weeks, which is crazy. Not a couple weeks, but a few weeks, which is crazy to say out loud because it's been a goal forever. And I currently, as was mentioned, what I do now is I work as a columnist for the Jewish Journal, a weekly columnist. It's a magazine based in LA. Please feel free to read it online, read my column online if you wish, just Blake Flayton, my header at Jewish Journal. And I run a nonprofit, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit, the New Zionist Congress, which seeks to empower young, I don't use the term pro-Israel because we'll get to that, but young Zionist students to really embrace their identity and to ask hard questions and to have hard conversations and to fight back against movements that want to shut us up and that want to marginalize us. But if you had told me that I would be involved in this work and I'd be moving to Israel to continue this work just 3 years ago, or maybe not even, maybe like 2.5 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. I would have like asked you if that was a crazy idea to me. Because what I wanted to do when I got to college, and this is why I went to college in DC, I wanted to be a progressive activist. And I wanted to work for my congressman, which I did on Capitol Hill. I wanted to intern for a bunch of different organizations. Like I was interested in climate advocacy and reproductive justice and criminal justice reform and all of the hits. And I wanted to be in DC in the thick of it all. And I went to protests every weekend, at the White House. And my major was political communication, which I guess didn't really go to waste because I guess I still communicate politically for a living. And so, and this was never on my radar. Being Jewish, having a Jewish family and being a part of a community was always important to me, but it was definitely not the center of my career. I was bar mitzvahed, I went to Hebrew school. We come from a Reform family, so we went to synagogue, 2 or 3 times a year. But I went to a Jewish summer camp every year. And an important thing about that Jewish summer camp is I met a bunch of Israelis, which some of you can probably relate to if you went to a Jewish summer camp as well. Maybe some of your friends, your counselors or staff working at the camp were from Israel. And I became friends with a lot of them. So I knew a lot of Israelis growing up. And, I sometimes went on vacation with them, like if they ever were in the States during the school year, things like that, or I hung out with them at least. So all this to say, it was important, but it certainly wasn't the focal point. Until the weirdest things started happening to me in college. And that was in the spaces in which I was socializing with people, while hanging out with people who I really wanted to be friends with. And while going to events, going to, as I mentioned, like protests and organizing and doing projects and at work on Capitol Hill, I kept hearing this very emotional grievance against Israel. And at first, and what I mean by that is, it didn't sound political to me. It sounded personal. You know, the way in which people would speak about if there was an issue with Israel. Like I remember when Israel didn't let Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib visit the country. You know, I think that was back in 2019. The way that people spoke about it around me felt like intrinsically I understood that this wasn't a political objection to a country. This didn't sound like when I talk about what I don't like going on with China. This didn't sound like, you know, when I discuss human rights abuses in other places in the world and I, you know, am criticizing different governments and regimes. It sounded, you know, people were comparing the IDF to Nazis, which immediately felt to me like something was wrong. Because that has a sort of vindictiveness to it. And, you know, at first it's funny because I went along with it, because I thought to myself, if I agree with these people on A through Y, issue-wise, I mean, I must also agree with them on Z. Z in this case meaning the issue of Zionism in Israel. And, you know, I thought to myself, well, I must be the one who's biased. I must be the one, because of my Jewish upbringing, who has had a slanted education, and maybe I'm too, you know, forgiving of Israel, and I'm too sensitive to subjects surrounding Israel. I need to, you know, unlearn and educate myself. Okay, so I did educate myself, but I don't think I arrived at the conclusion that the people who were around me wanted me to arrive at, because I started eventually saying, you know, you can't say those things. I'm like, look, I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive. I want the Palestinians to have a state. I don't necessarily like Benjamin Netanyahu, who was PM at the time. I don't really see, you know, I'm all for criticizing. But what you're doing by saying that Israel has no right to exist, that the Jews who live in Israel are all Europeans, you know, who have colonized the land, that, you know, Israel's committing war crimes every day. It's borderline obsessive, and it's not helpful. And it feels like something is lying behind the surface of what you're saying, because you're using tropes that I recognize. Like when, you know, I went to a club meeting at the beginning of my sophomore year of high school. And, you know, they described within the first 5 minutes of their meeting, and it was the Democratic Socialists of America meeting. And within the first 5 minutes, they said, in this club, we don't normalize Zionism, and we regard Zionism as a what did they say? A transnational movement, you know, kind of portraying Israelis as this kind of shady figure who were manipulating governments to, you know, take more land away from the Palestinians. And what started happening is I started saying this to my friends and to my peers, and the reaction I got from them, the Odo, you don't know what you're talking about. Stop being so sensitive. You know, you're just saying that because you had a Jewish pro-Israel upbringing, and you're trying to silence, you know, Palestinians, and you're trying to silence people of color, and you're trying to, you know, hurt the left and the left-wing cause. And I thought to myself, hold on a minute. I have seen so many scandals, and I've seen so much drama in this community, when every other time a member of a minority community, be it racial, ethnic, sexual, gender, ability level, whatever, and come forward with grievances and saying, I feel like I have been wronged. I feel like some of the behavior and some of the rhetoric and attitude is problematic to my community. Here's why. Progressive spaces always trip over themselves trying to make amends, to try to learn from what they did and better themselves, because it's all about, you know, equity and fairness and belonging. And that didn't happen with me. In fact, the opposite happened. There was a lot of anger directed towards me. And that got me thinking that, okay, so maybe all this Israel business isn't really about what Israel is doing, and maybe isn't about Israeli government policy. Maybe something else is happening here. Because all of this emotion just doesn't come, from nowhere. And so what eventually ended up happening after several anti-Semitic incidents happened at my campus, and these weren't incidents that necessarily, had to do again with Israeli policy. There was a girl who was caught on Snapchat walking down a hallway, and she was kind of drunk, and the video leaked to the student body. And the guy behind the camera, they're coming back home from a party. He says, "What are we going to do to Israel?" And she turns around and she says, "We're going to bomb Israel, you Jewish pieces of shit." So that was the first thing. Not the first thing, but in a series of several things. There was a march, an LGBT pride parade in Washington, D.C. that I was looking forward to participating in. And just like 3 days before it happened, the organizers of the Pride March came out and said that you weren't allowed to wave a rainbow flag if it had a Star of David in the middle, because it looked too much like the Israeli flag, and that, would offend people. But of course, they didn't make a statement against any other type of flags. It was just this one, not even the American flag or like, Iranian, whatever. It was just this flag. I'm sure some of you've seen it, the pride flag with the Megan David in the middle. There was the issue with the DSA. There was a series of things that kept happening. What I chose to do was to write about it, my experiences on campus as a progressive who felt alienated, who felt isolated, and who felt kind of betrayed by the people who I'd always associated myself with. And that article, I was lucky enough to get it published in the New York Times, in the opinion section of the New York Times. And it was one of the top trending articles for at least a week, which was, it changed my entire life. And what I learned from that article is I got thousands and thousands, and I'm not exaggerating here, thousands and thousands of messages from, young Jews, the parents of young Jews in the United States and Israel, all over the world, either sharing with me their experiences or asking me questions, wanting to learn more, or, I'm sending my kid off to school. I don't know which avenue, which school is better. I can't believe this is happening. And it was just completely overwhelming. And I realized how common my story is of Jews arriving to campus. And, a lot of us grow up in left-leaning circles. And we go to school in, cities and in liberal places. And we have no idea what to do when we confront this type of rhetoric. And we see this from our peers. We have this kind of internal crisis where we want to be accepted, we want to be part of the club, and yet we can't fully ignore this kind of itch that reads to us as just anti-Semitism, really. And so that's very difficult, I think, to handle. And I use the example of a club rush, and all of these freshmen, either Jewish or not Jewish, arriving in their school's auditorium or gymnasium or whatever, where there's all those booths, and there's people behind the booths asking you to sign up for their organization. And you're impressionable and you're excited because you want to get involved in campus life. And if you're in my position, and my political views have shifted since, but if you're in my position, you see, the Fight for the $15 Minimum Wage Club. And then you see the Progressive Presidential Campaign Club. And then you see the Legalized Pot Club. And you see the, BLM Club, whatever, what have you. And in the middle in the same section of all of those tables is a Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. And they have a sign on their table that says, boycott apartheid Israel. And a lot of Jewish students do the same thing I did, where they think I've been brainwashed. And by the way, these students will tell you that right up front, that like, oh, it doesn't matter if you're not sure about us. We'll help you, support us, and we'll help you see the light. And so a lot of them go on with, my experience is not unique in the sense of this happening, but it's unique in the sense of where I didn't fall for it. because a lot of Jewish young people do in fact fall for it. And that's why at a lot of campuses right now, you will see Jewish students often in the forefront of the movement to boycott Israel, and in the forefront of the movement to whip up anti-Zionist activism on campus. So that's really that's my story, and I've been advocating for those students and those young people ever since. And that was the point of my nonprofit, which you can definitely look up. It's just newzionists.org, and we're a community who are launching our first 2 chapters in autumn. And we want to provide a space for young Zionist Jews to form connections with other young Zionist Jews and to learn not through your typical pro-Israel programming, but through conversation and debate and discussion and reading and writing and listening, how to have a mature understanding of this issue and how to advance our cause in the long run. So that's really where we're at. And of course, I've kept writing, and I write about a lot of different things than just the anti-Semitism on college campus issue. I write about every Jewish topic under the sun, really. But I keep on coming back to it because I think it explains so much. And I also think it's important because the students who are marinating in this ideology on campus of Israel hatred, of anti-Zionism, of blaming Israel for domestic problems in the United States, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, like police brutality, and like wars starting overseas and things like that. It's important because they're not jettisoning, they're not leaving these ideas once they graduate. You know, they're entering really important institutions, government, law, media, entertainment, you know, even if they're social media influencers, you know, business, I mean, and so they take these ideas with them, and that has a very profound, important effect on the culture, because the culture then starts to drift away from Israel, and the culture starts to kind of turn on the Jews who support Israel, which I believe is very dangerous. And as we saw last May, when there was the conflict between Israel and Hamas, we see what happens when those attitudes boil over and they become justified. And the truth is, this is not new. We've seen this happen in Europe with anti-Zionism, making it unsafe for Jews to just go about their lives. You know, we've seen the barbed wire outside of synagogues in Europe. That is coupled with the obvious threat from white nationalism and far right activism. But it's like they're getting it from both sides. And we've seen this in Britain, you know, with the Labour Party and the scandal with Jeremy Corbyn and the institutionalizing of anti-Zionism within a left-wing party, and how that has actual consequences for the Jewish community. You know, in 2019, I think it was, what was it? Upwards of 40% of British Jews reported strongly considering leaving the United Kingdom should Jeremy Corbyn, a left-wing leader, a left-wing person who styled himself an advocate for minorities, an advocate for justice and tolerance, should he have been elected prime minister? 40% of Jews, that's hundreds of thousands of Jews. That's crazy. And I believe very strongly that because of what is happening on college campuses right now, because the same thing happened in Britain, by the way, at Oxford, at Cambridge, in left-wing clubs and organizations at different universities in Britain. I think it's because it's happening at our universities, we are not too far away from that reality. And I think that reality is unbearable for a lot of American Jews because they want to continue supporting liberal values and liberal ideas in the United States. But they won't be able to do that if their desired party turns against them. And of course, you know, the window to jump ship is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because I do believe while all of this is happening, the right wing in the country is also becoming radicalized by nefarious forces, shall we say. And so it's a lose-lose situation, and that's why I want to continue the work of inspiring young people to be out and proud Jews, out and proud Zionists, and to say that we have no tolerance for anti-Semitism, regardless of where or who it comes from. And I think that that work earnestly begins on the college campus, because that's kind of the microcosm, and that's where all of this is playing out right now. And we'll talk about that more. But yeah, I'd love to hear questions, comments, that sort of thing. Just like casual, like I usually do these conversations, just like, you know, very easy back and forth. No stress.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Blake, for those wise words. I'm sure we all learned a considerable amount. I see Jonah's hand up in the back. I'm gonna walk the mic over to him now.
Thank you very much. Hello, you can hear me, I guess. Great. Thank you so much. Learned so much from your presentation and your experience. Very grateful to have had you here to share it. But what do you say to progressive Jewish students who might be inclined to feel the way you do, but see that so many mainstream pro-Israel organizations tend to either lean towards the right, or if they don't explicitly lean toward the right, media coverage has revealed that certain donors have endorsed certain controversial, prominent politicians who I'm sure we all know that they might not like, given that they are progressives. How do you advise a would-be progressive Zionist to reconcile their political beliefs within the domestic American sphere with the fact that some of these donors might have less than savory, politics and other issues? Thank you.
Totally understood. So the first thing I will say is that, I mentioned before how I didn't like the phrase pro-Israel. And one of the reasons why is it's because and I swear this has to do with your question, just let me get there. But like, what other country do we say that for? If someone believes in the existence of Italy, do we say that they're pro-Italy? Somewhat, pro-Thailand, pro-South Colombia. I mean, like, what does that mean? We don't say that for any other country. And that's because it's really only Israel's existence itself that is constantly under supervision, under questioning, that sort of thing. And so to that, I will say, you can be supportive of Israel's existence and want to fight back against those who do not want it to exist, without lending your voice and without being a part of, like what you mentioned, like establishment organizations that have like a right-wing aura to them. You can just be a like the vast majority of Jews are, just a Zionist Jew, who wants what's best for Israel, but doesn't need to lend themselves to any particular platform that you deem problematic. And that's why, that's where the New Zionist Congress comes in. We're a huge umbrella organization. The only criteria that we have to participate in our events and to, be a part of the movement, the organization, is that you have to believe in a sovereign Jewish democratic state somewhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Those are the parameters. And we really strongly believe in youth organizing, because we don't have millions and millions and millions of dollars to spend on political candidates. We don't have fancy dinner parties, and we don't, wear suits and ties and go to discuss, the latest defense package and what that means for Israel. We are truly honoring what Zionism started as, which was Jews meeting together, judgment-free, to discuss the issues of the day and how they feel about them and how they relate to them. And I really do believe that that's the future of Zionism, is that sort of work. Less establishment, more rough and tumble, more, I wrote a piece for Sapir Journal once called "Make Zionism Sexy Again." And that's exactly what I mean. Like, we don't need any more $2 haircut Zionism. We need young people making their voices heard, who are not afraid to have, as I mentioned before, hard conversations. And that brings me to my second point, which is that I feel like one of the reasons why Jews who arrive on college campus are so susceptible to the narrative that your community lied to you and that you've been brainwashed into supporting Israel and you need to unlearn that, is because there's a kind of kernel of truth to it. In the way that when we are grown up, at least from my perspective, I was taught to support Israel, but I wasn't taught why. And that left me completely defenseless, on campus. I was taught, that cherry tomatoes come from Israel, that, I've seen the videos of the Jews arriving off the boats in 48 and the 60s and the 70s 1,000,001 times. Israel was the Hora. Israel was, folk dancing and Mizrahi dance music. It was all of that. But it was none of the substance behind why we actually need to continuously lend our support. And that leaves Jewish young people at a tremendous disadvantage. And I would say just to anybody in the room, if you ever find yourself in a quote unquote pro-Israel space that is uncomfortable with actually having conversations about Israel, conversations about domestic issues in Israel, conversations about the conflict, conversations about Israel's past, present, and future, then you don't need to be a part of that space, because there are other spaces that are coming to be that are willing, that are ready to challenge you and ready to strengthen your arguments. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you so much. I especially loved the cherry tomatoes line. We use that all the time when speaking to students. Does anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I call that cherry tomato advocacy, just like.
And also ways.
And ways advocacy.
Yeah, and there's another thing, I don't know how to say it in English. So it's like the water thing.
Oh, the water technology.
Yeah. The foot in Hebrew, so I don't know.
Right. It's like if someone tells you, like Israel's committing genocide, you can't say, but we're the high-tech capital of the Middle East. That's just not a winning argument.
As I understood, I think you live in LA, I'm not sure. And
I live in New York now. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of liberals in LA, I think, as I understood, because I follow like one guy and he goes to UCLA, I think. And he said like he feels attacked from liberals on campus. And I wanted to say if like the California governor / like, the college, I don't know how it works in America, if they do anything to balance it a bit, because I think it's getting worse, specifically in California, but in general.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and there's obviously a lot of discourse surrounding this. There was in 2019 there was an executive order from the White House that included Jews under, I think it's Title VI. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's Title VI discrimination, meaning that like Zionist students are protected by the Civil Rights Act because Israel is our nationality, and Jewish is not just a religion, but also a nationality. And there was a whole amount of controversy over that. And so I think, and there's been cases since where when the law gets involved, or when politicians and governments get involved, it creates a mess, right? Because everyone says, you're silencing my free speech. The Jews say, no, you're silencing my free speech. And my thinking on this has morphed and changed and developed over time. But just in the last couple weeks, what have we seen? We have seen an investigation into Cooney law, right? Because they had a number of anti-Semitic incidents happening on their campus, right? And we're also seeing the Department of Education investigating the University of Southern California, investigating the claims of Rose Rich, who's a friend of mine, who got, removed, essentially forced out of her student government position because of incessant bullying, because she had at one point worked with Zionist nonprofits and posted about Israel on her Instagram, and the students at USC did not take kindly to that. And so the Department of Education is investigating her claims and her case. And it's heartening and it's inspiring to see the outcry when action like this actually happens. The Jewish community, maybe those who didn't know about it, wakes up to this reality and saying, oh my God, You know, the FBI is involved in investigating, you know, Cooney law, like in America in 2022 because of anti-Semitism accusations, because a Jewish teacher found her keyboard covered in urine, or at Rutgers University where students were throwing eggs at a Jewish fraternity during their Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day commemoration, screaming baby killers and go back to Europe. You know, these are serious things. And once these issues become more public, more people begin to see that this isn't really about Israel and Israeli policy. This is something that is happening on the college campus that is different from anything that the United States, the American Jew, has seen before. So I do hope more people get involved. And I will say this about that, because it's our job as Zionist Jews involved in the war of the words to always anticipate what they're going to say, what the other side is going to say. They always say they're trying to silence us. They're trying to eliminate criticism of Israel and kick it off campus. You know, they're so hypocritical. They need a safe space, blah, blah, blah. It is important for us to debunk that argument and to say, no, 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 this is not criticism of Israel, and to explain to them how it is not criticism of Israel. And this is something that scholar David Hirsch calls the Livingston formulation. When someone says something blatantly anti-Semitic, and then the Jew says, that's anti-Semitic, and then the person who said it says, I'm just criticizing Israel, stop trying to silence me. Because what it does is it moves the conversation away from what was actually said, turns it into a political discussion about Israel, and then frames the Jew as some sort of right-wing hack who's, you know, ultra-Zionist and who's being unreasonable. It's a trick and it works very well for them. And it's incumbent upon us to not fall for it. So every time they're trying to say, my free speech, say, what about my free speech? I should be able to have a space on campus too, without you calling me, you know, a Nazi, a white supremacist, you know, a racist, a colonialist, what have you, the very people who my people escaped from just decades ago. We need to even the playing field here. And don't you dare say this is about Israel, because it's definitely not.
Thank you so much for that response. And I mean, just because you mentioned so many schools that are in the region I work in, let's not forget what happened at SUNY New Paltz last year. If you have more questions on that, please ask me later.
I understand you're like online a lot and you have like an online presence.
Are you telling me to go outside? I understand you're online a lot.
So I know like when you have an online presence and you say things that like aren't really like part of the like agenda, like people kind of like dogpile you and they like shit on you and they're like really mean. How do you kind of like, do you usually like deflect, or like how do you kind of like deal with that like personally, and like kind of like, I'm sure that like takes a toll on your like mind and stuff?
You know, it did. That's the thing. Like when I first started writing and I first started being an online presence, it did. Like I used to get super bent and stressed out about it. But I honestly, the way I see it is that there's not a gun to my head. You know, I'm not being forced to be on social media. So like, obviously I can deal with it because I'm still on social media. You know, I think that, you know, that's just part of the game. If you want to be, and if I had to reason with myself and I said, if I want to be an advocate for Jews, history shows us that, you know, advocates for Jews have to take a lot of shit, you know, because people don't like us when we're loud. People don't like us when we're, when we make noise. People don't like us when we stand up for ourselves. That's been the case for thousands of years. And you know, if you would have told advocates for Jewish people 50, 60 years ago that they could say and do whatever they want, but the worst that they would have to deal with was like Macedonian trolls, you know, making fun of their hair online, they would have loved it. You know, Natan Sharansky was in a gulag for 11 years. I'll be fine with a Twitter dog pile.
Yeah.
The way I see it.
I also wanted to ask, like, where do you like find your allies like outside of the Jewish community? Like, do you feel like you are able to like draw support from like different people, like different communities who aren't Jewish? And like, how do you do that?
Of course. I mean, look, there's support all over. Like, most people are so reasonable about this issue. They're just obviously not the loudest. It's like it's very easy to have still a really great college career, if you're not battling this out in progressive spaces all day, because most likely you'll have friends who, will, even if you're an activist, if you're vocal about it, you'll have friends who say, and they might be Jewish, not Jewish, wherever, they'll say, yeah, you're Jewish and you care about Israel. That makes sense. Anyway, what are we doing for dinner?
Yeah.
And it's important to keep those people really close to you. And, it's like, it's so corny and cringe, but it's true. It's like the people who mind don't matter and the people who matter don't mind, right? So I have a lot of friends in New York and in my hometown of Phoenix and DC who are Jewish and not Jewish. And, they know what I do for a living, and we have a connection that's above that. So it's all about making, genuine connections with people, and, you'll have a lot of friendships and relationships that come from that. This doesn't need to be your entire world, even if you do speak out. Like, I think like a lot of young people are like, oh my God, I want to advocate for Israel, or I want to say something about the issues and the controversies on my campus. Like if there's like a deadly exchange resolution or a BDS bill, like I want to fight back because this is important to me, but I don't want to lose friends. It's like, if this is the thing that you're going to lose friends over, did you really want those friends to begin with? You're like, how am I going to have like, you will find better friends and you'll make better allies. That's what I will say.
Thank you. Also, you're in New York, right? I'm going to message you on Instagram so we can get coffee. My Instagram is like RCEEYEF.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll like DM you afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that. Who else has a question?
Hi, thank you so much for the speech. It was really cool. So I'm from LA originally, and I was curious about what you said about like progressive Zionists. As far as like, I know there are a lot of like, as you gave certain examples of different people on maybe on social media and other things that kind of try to silence you by saying, well, I'm not advocating against the existence of Israel, just the government, right? And that's kind of how they can shut you up. What do you think about, do you think there should be any action taken against, if any, against organizations like such as that kind of hold that position, like maybe J Street, that are kind of considered by some Zionists to be, basically making that position? Like I know on their website, I think they say they're pro-Israel, pro-peace, according to their words, but they seem to criticize, Israel more than advocate for it. So.
Yeah, so I've written about this a lot. Thank you for that question. It's really important, especially now that those organizations are becoming more vocal. And by those organizations, I mean J Street, if not now. And there's a bunch of like sub-organizations like JREFJ, like that hold the position that kind of straddle the line of, we're not anti-Israel, we're just anti the government of Israel. And, we're just super critical of Israel, and how dare you call us anti-Semitic. And I essentially, they're not fans of me. But it's so weird to me that they're not fans of me, because I agree with so much of these organizations. However, I also agree with you that, to me, if you're going to really make us believe that you are a pro-Israel organization, but just, anti-occupation or, anti-right-wing parties in the Knesset, then you have to at the very least, make your support known, or make it known that you are against movements that seek to wipe Israel off the map completely. And I think over the last couple of years, we have seen, and this varies based on the organization, but we've seen a lot of cowardice in the face of that, or intentional ignoring of those who seek to really do Israel harm and to really do the Jewish community harm. And there's been an inability to say, we will fight for Israel's right to exist, and we're a part of, the mainstream Jewish community, and standing up for us having self-determination in our ancestral homeland, while also being kind of the left flank and demanding better of Israel and trying to impose the changes that we want to see in Israel. I don't understand why that's so difficult. Maybe it's because they just don't have an audience for it. They need to go one way or the other. And by the way, I think that's the case of a lot of very pro-Israel organizations too, is they feel like they can't criticize or they can't make their, they can't have honest discussions about what they would like to see happen in Israel because they'll turn off part of their audience too. So it's really this gross kind of, tails I win, heads you lose. We have to choose one or the other. And that's really upsetting to me. That's very, very upsetting to me. Also, I think these organizations realize that they get a lot more attention and a lot more praise when they get more and more anti-Israel. And so that incentivizes them to continue being more and more anti-Israel. And that turns them away from actually saying anything nice about the Jewish homeland ever. It's also funny. It's small-minded thinking, really. It's lack of nuance. It's lack of open-mindedness. And it's funny because it's like, this is a little bit specific, but I am in full support of a two-state solution, right? That's been a staple of my Zionism forever. I'm supportive of a two-state solution. And yet I have a lot of trouble in two-state solution spaces because I have a very heterodox thinking when it comes to how we actually get there. It differs from a lot of the classical understanding and classical policy positions that two-staters say need to happen in order to get us there. And so I just am, and I'm not saying this poor me, because I'm saying this probably is the case for a lot of people who share my views and share my opinions. We're kind of cast out of those spaces and we're kind of treated as suspect. And that also is a reason for the New Zionist Congress, because we're looking at a Jewish world right now that is so polarized and that is so, anytime something happens, they run into their corners, that we need to have space to have this type of thinking and to have these sort of conversations. But I honestly do think it's a problem because young people who join movements who maybe don't advertise themselves as anti-Israel on paper, but who are exceedingly getting more anti-Israel, they go down that path too, without even realizing that their stances on so much has changed. Meaning, if just a year ago they flinched and felt uncomfortable with someone calling Israel an apartheid state, now openly say that Israel's an apartheid state and don't even realize that it's not other people who have moved, it's them who have moved.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hey, with regards to weaponizing progressivism and with regards to distraction, cherry picking, cherry tomato tactics, can we talk about pinkwashing? One, is there any truth to the allegation? And two, regardless of the truth of it, how do we combat it? Because it's essentially distraction.
I like to say that I've been accused of pinkwashing more than anybody else in the world. And I will, I hold that title very, very proudly. And what's funny is, and this ties into your answer, is when I'm accused of pinkwashing, it is just me in Tel Aviv being like gay and going to parties and like doing what I do in New York, but I just happen to be in Tel Aviv. But like, because I'm in Tel Aviv, suddenly I'm like a Mossad psyop, like who's manipulating the world into like, thinking that like Israel's a gay paradise, like don't worry about the occupation or anything like that. And it's like, no, I'm just like going out to dinner with my friends. So there's that. Like, listen, could the Israeli government be using their, we're the only place in the Middle East that doesn't openly discriminate against LGBT people, which is not even that true, but like in the case of Tel Aviv, it's like a third of people in Tel Aviv are queer. Could Israel be using that in order to kind of deflect public opinion from the more problematic aspects of Israel? Absolutely. That's possible and might have been done. And it might, still be happening. I don't really see it as much as anybody claims that it's happening. But it could certainly be a phenomenon. However, the way that the accusation of pinkwashing is used now is completely bogus and hateful and anti-Semitic, because the way that it's being used now is just to push Zionist Jews who happen to be a part of the gay community out of gay circles, out of gay spaces and queer spaces. Because it's imposing on them a litmus test to say, you're gay, but you're also Jewish and you have ties to Israel. Well, in order to be one of us, you have to give up any national religious ties that you may have to your peoplehood. And it's used to just, demonize queer people in Israel, regardless of what they do. They could be on a TV show. They could be, just a regular Instagram user on social media, an influencer, whatever, and they're just attacked because it's what it is it's hate against who they are, and it's hate against, their family story and where they ended up in the world and where they grew up, disguised as just political opposition, and they could not even be making a political argument, right? And so that's what's behind the anti-pinkwashing movement today, and it's unacceptable. Like, Tel Aviv Pride is not pinkwashing. And the thousands of hateful comments that you will get under, like, an Israeli posting a picture of themselves at Pride with a rainbow flag with a Megan David in the middle is not pinkwashing in the sense of what they're telling us it is. Like, why ever learn the history of the 6-Day War when you can just look at all these pictures of, gay flight attendants at Ben Gurion Airport? Those are just gays living their lives. And that, in that case, it is bigoted and it is discriminatory, because it's telling us that we can't be who we are and have pride in our whole selves. That's what I'll say about pinkwashing.
Thank you.
And also, this is also important. What's funny about pinkwashing is it's not only pink that they use as the color. They say greenwashing when Israel does something good for the environment, right? They say, oh God, there's so many of them. But there was a 972 article about Mizrahi washing, about how, like, Israel uses its population of, like, Jews who look like people of color to distract the world from its war crimes, which it's a Jewish magazine. LOL. There's a million colors. There's, like, purple washing, purple washing was about how it's easier for women to get an abortion in Israel than it is in a lot of European and Middle Eastern countries. So there's this type of washing and that type of washing. And what that comes down to is the belief that it doesn't matter what Israel does, Israel's always evil. And every time they do something good, it's not because they want to do something good, it's that they want to fool people and manipulate them into thinking better of them while they do heinous, horrible things behind the scenes. And it's totally obvious to see the anti-Semitic trope in that no matter what Israel does, it will always be tainted and it will always be washing, and it'll always be, the Jews are being sneaky again and trying to fool us and lead us down a path of deception. I think it's funny. I'm gonna think of other, because there's like a whole color of the rainbow washing. There's like red washing, which I forget what it is. And it just means that Israelis can never do anything good.
We have literally spent hours and hours debating all of the washings in the office. We have time for one more question.
Washing.
Cool. So my question is somewhat following on from one of your points you just made, actually, about how there's often, with these ideas, when Israel does something good, that there's some ulterior motive behind that. And I think it's very easy for that idea to be put into a public space and be believed, because we're in a very digital age of information. And I think us being Jews I like to describe us as a minority of minorities, but we get outnumbered by other minorities very easily. And these ideas can really be given a lot of showtime online. And I'm that guy who, if I see a post that has a pro-Palestinian narrative that isn't true, I'll report it. And all that seems to come my way is more kind of posts of that nature that just only serve to annoy me, truth be told. My question then kind of is, with all of this happening online, and, you know, just incessant bullying in comment sections, basically, if you voice a dissenting opinion that is in favor of Israel, is there anything, because I remember you mentioned to a previous question that you used to struggle with this identity, and how is there any kind of techniques or maybe an epiphany that you had that made you a lot more comfortable in who you are defending these ideas in spaces online? And if you could please share them with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, I just think the answer is that it's just to put it into perspective. Jews have had to deal with so much trash and mudslinging and a lot worse actual violence along the way of our story. We are, without a doubt, the most privileged Jews in history because of we wake up every morning in an era where a sovereign state exists, where, God forbid, something goes wrong in our home countries. We have a place that has to take us in. And not only a place that has to take us in, but it's not a refugee camp. It's not a swamp with malaria. It's not an underdeveloped civilization that's attacked 24/7, where there's constant war. It's a full-fledged cosmopolitan, you know, major economy and well-defended strip of land that has also, you know, obvious ties and connections to our past and to our spiritual beliefs. That's a miracle. That's nothing short of a miracle. And so it's important to keep that perspective, that it is, of course, every day extremely important to fight anti-Semitism, at least from my perspective, and to make the case for Israel and to make the case for the Jewish community everywhere. But just also knowing that if you were going to do that, if that's going to be your fight, you're going to have to deal with some stuff. You're going to have to deal with some shit that's going to hurt. You know, you might lose a couple people along the way. You know, you might, oh God, lose a social media follower. You know, you might, things might not be, you know, all peaches and cream. If you write an article, let's say, for your school newspaper, and a lot of people disagree with it and say, you know, bad things about you behind your back, it's really the least that Jews have had to deal with in standing up for themselves. And I take so much inspiration from those Jews who had it a lot worse. Like, you know, right now in the you know, my family's Russian, and you know, the news coming out that Russia is, you know, demanding its Jewish agency cease operations, which would make it very hard for Jews to make Aliyah. And there's actually been some reporting from the Jerusalem Post that Russia may be going after other Jewish organizations. This is the same thing they did in the 60s and 70s, right? And even in the 50s. And if you read the stories of refuseniks, you know, these people who demanded to leave Russia, and you know, or people earlier than that who spoke out against the, you know, outlawing of Hebrew, the outlawing of you know, religious schools and Jewish ritual in the Soviet Union, you know, they were put through hell. They were imprisoned. They were intimidated. Their families were intimidated. You know, they were in military confinement. I mean, just horror stories. Or you think of Jewish teenagers in Israel who have to do 6 months of IDF training. I can't do 6 months of IDF training. I can't even do a push-up correctly, you know? So like, it's just, we all have to deal with it. You know, I don't have to serve for 3 years, you know, but, you know, but I am fighting the war of the words, and that's a different kind of battle. So just putting into perspective that Jews everywhere are dealing with this, but every position that we're in now, our ancestors would be amazed that we have the opportunity to kvetch, to complain, you know, about getting, I don't know, getting dogpiled because, I don't know, you tagged the wrong person or something.
That's a very powerful response. Thank you. I appreciated that.
Thank you so much again, Blake, for everything that you have said. We have no more time for questions. Please clap. I don't know.
Please clap, Jeb Bush.
I know I didn't have to beg, but I just saw a few starting. It looked like they wanted permission. I don't know. So I have 2 announcements. The first is that we're all going to take a group picture with Blake. So line up against the tables.
Oh my God, this is, I wanted to do this in person. one day.
I hear you. Listen to Douglas. The second announcement will come shortly, but you know, suspense. Move faster. Strict schedules.
I also think it's just funny that people always ask like Jewish activists, like, how do you deal with all the hate? It's like there are fully 19-year-old Jews like with guns training for the army right now. I'm fine.
Mush. Mush.
Ashmael.
Mush. Mush. I love the power that this microphone affords me. I might just keep it the whole conference.